So I accidentally became a guppy breeder, but not in the way that I think most people do. I mean, let's face it, guppies, they're super easy to breed. You don't really have to do anything special to them to get it to happen. But at least in my experience, there are some things that you can do to improve the amount of babies that you're gonna have and probably the overall health of what those offspring are gonna turn into. So I thought today I'd give you like my whole thing on guppies and the magic guppy water. Is it really a thing? I mean, that's what I call it. It's not really magic or really that special, but it was something that I needed to tweak in order to get the results that I wanted. I really needed to maximize the output of the guppy babies that I would get from each spawn. I'll explain a little bit more on that in a little bit, and I think there definitely are some things that you can do to bump those numbers up. So we're gonna talk kind of all about it. I think last week I said this week we'd be going over the whole new fish room build, or at least this side of it, but that's obviously not done yet. I had the furnace go out, I had the car go out, I had some water from a gutter get behind some siding, and on top of that, you guys are you're buying way too much legit fish food. I'm kind of overwhelmed. But I mean, those are all like good things. I mean, except for the first three of them. But we're hanging in there. Still wanted to get a video out to you today. So guppies are really easy to breed. Like if you go and you get a single female guppy from a fish store, you put them in a bag, you bring them home. Sometimes you might even have a baby popped out in the bag before you even put it in your tank. Like these fish are just built to procreate. They're kind of like the rabbits of the fish tank world, maybe. Like you can buy a single female guppy that doesn't even appear to be pregnant, and then a month later you have babies in your tank, and that's because guppies can hold on to the male part of the equation. I'm not sure if I could say that word on YouTube or not. We're not gonna risk it. They could retain that, keep it viable, and then use it kind of like when they want to, or they probably don't choose to use it, but I'm not sure if all live bearers can do that, but guppies for sure. There's like an urban myth almost that guppies are just pregnant for forever because they have this ability, but it's just kind of a cool little fact about them. But live bearers in general are just kind of like that. They're just easy to breed. But at least for me, back at my old place, before I started doing a couple of these things, I wasn't really getting that many babies from my guppies or my live bearers in general. I shouldn't say that because I don't really keep any live bearers other than the guppies. Like I'm brand new to these trout goodeids down here. They're super sweet. And hopefully once they get a little bit bigger, we can start breeding those. But I think the reason why I wasn't getting very good numbers out of my guppies is because my water is so soft. So if I do a test strip on the tap water here, it's like KH at the very bottom of the test strip. The pH is gonna be in the low 7s, and then my GH is also like the lowest thing on the test strip. I can't remember. I think that's like 20 or 40 ppm. Actually, yeah, blue is 0, maybe 25. And on top of that, the tanks that I had the guppies in were aquariums that, had an active substrate that helps to reduce the pH a little bit more. Those were tanks that most of the time didn't have CO2, but if they did have CO2, then the pH would be even lower. So super soft water with a low pH. And I think that's why, the guppies that I had in the past, they wouldn't really produce that many babies for me. Like it wasn't like every month there was 1 or 2. It was like every few months I might see 1 or 2. And if you're trying to get guppy babies like I am right now, that's not a very good way to do it. Like a guppy can have a bunch of babies, like almost 30 of them. If it's a full grown female, they can do that almost once a month. One of the first times I actually tried to intentionally breed guppies, I got a trio, put them into some soft water conditions. You might remember this wine glass tank. And they had a ton of babies, but that was probably because that female was already pregnant. She was already brewing up a bunch of babies before I got her. And then, subsequently I put her in the soft water tank. She has a bunch of babies a few days later or a week later, whatever. And then I go, oh yeah, no, it's super easy to breed guppies. But then after that, the next month goes by, another month goes by, and we don't really have too many new babies. And so that was the case for me. Not saying that that's everybody's experience, but that was definitely mine. So the first big change that I decided to make, and it was the one change that actually turned everything around for me, was just increasing the water hardness. Like it's not magic, it's not something super special. I like to call it magic guppy water because I'm weird, and it just kind of like, that's how it worked for me. It seemed like it was magic because all I had to do was tweak those minerals, and then it sort of unlocked the power of the guppy. but it's super simple to do. There's a few different ways that you can do it. I'm gonna show you those in just a second, but I do also wanna say that not everybody's gonna have the same experience that I did. I see comments from people, I talk to other breeder people on the phone sometimes, and they say that they breed their guppies just fine in soft water. And I can't tell you why they had that experience and I had the one that I had. One of those things about fish keeping that's kind of a hard thing to explain. Just because my situation was this way doesn't mean yours is going to be, but I think in general, if you harden up your water a little bit, if it's super soft, you're probably gonna have a little bit more luck, just like I did. If you're on like a well, have super hard water, or it's just super hard coming out of the tap, then you probably don't need to do any of this. What's still gonna be maybe important to you is some of the other things that we talk about right after this. In the last video where we talked a little bit about this stuff, I was using Fritz salt to try and harden up my water, and that was working pretty good. It seemed to leave a little bit of the KH out, like it might have boosted it a little bit, but it definitely wasn't as much as maybe I wanted to. I'm still not 100% convinced that the KH really matters that much to the guppy and what we're trying to do here. KH, of course, refers to the carbonate hardness. I'm not sure if that plays a role in the guppy physiology at all. It is, a pH buffer, so having more KH in your water isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can also raise the pH a little bit, which you might want to have happen. A little bit of a higher pH is maybe a beneficial thing for the guppy and the breeding, but at least I haven't seen that play a big role. It's mostly just the minerals, the GH, the calcium, the magnesium. So you can boost that up using salt. Again, we're using Fritz salt. They're a sponsor of the channel. They've been with me for a super long time. Salt is also a thing that is beneficial for a few different things in your aquarium, even if you're not trying to, have a saltwater tank. But anyway, we take about a half a teaspoon. I think it's a half a teaspoon. What is this? I use a teaspoon per 5 gallons, and that seems to bring me up to the levels that I'm comfortable with. Now, somebody mentioned in the last video, if you want to add KH as well, because that Fritz salt doesn't really bump it up that much, you could try using like something like this. So this is the shrimp mineral GH and KH, and it has instructions on the back for how much you want to use to get, what ppm or degrees hardness of each. What I found is that using about half of this little cup into 5 gallons brings me up to close to the same as using that teaspoon of salt. Using this stuff does give me a little bit more KH, which again, not sure that that's super important. This stuff is also like this amount doesn't last me a super long time, is only $20 cheaper than a 5-pound bucket of salt though. And that's kind of an important aspect of this whole thing, is price. I was really shocked at how expensive this stuff was. So it's still, even to this day, on the fence whether or not I should even be messing with this, if I should just use the salt. So I get the respective salt in each bucket, and then we just fill it up a little bit. At that point, if you're not gonna be covering this with a lid, then you don't have to add any kind of dechlorinator because it'll just naturally gas off in the next day or two. But for this system that I have, that I unfortunately have to use in this room, we have to fill up the buckets and then let it wait to heat up a little bit or get to room temperature. So I typically just put a lid on it and wait a few days before I'm going to be using it. But if you're not in that situation, if you're adding in, the right temperature of the water and you want to use it right away, then yeah, just go ahead and add some dechlorinator. I, of course, use the Fritz dechlorinator just like we use the Fritz salt. Again, we thank Fritz for all that they've done for us over the years, and if you want to get any of their products, there will be links down below. Like a 5-gallon bucket of salt is going to last me infinitely longer than however much is in here. You can get a little tiny container of this that's only $20. I've only taken out that one plastic bag of salt, and that's lasted me for a super long time through all the brine shrimp hatcheries that I've done, all of that. And this thing is still completely full. Something I think I forgot to mention is this is the blue RPM. There's also a red one that they offer, different product. I think it's all the same, but it does have more carbonate hardness. So if you do want to try and match that, I think you might be able to do it with that product. Not 100% sure though. All right, so I filled these buckets up yesterday, that footage you just saw. Let's go ahead and let's test strip these guys and let's see what they're coming out as. So this was the bucket where we use the salty shrimp stuff. Try and balance that on there, and then we'll pop the lid off of this guy. This was the Fritz salt, and we'll see how close we got. I always forget, what do we have to wait, 30 seconds? 60 seconds. Okay, let's try and compare these two. Let's not get them mixed up once we move them. Oh, I didn't pan over with the camera. Sorry. So we have the salty shrimp stuff. This is going to be the KH boosted, or it's going to have more carbonate in it than this stuff, the salt. But as you can see, there is a difference in that category, but the GH, basically the same. pH is also looking very similar. So we have a little bit of a dark orange. Maybe we're in the 7.2, 7.6 range, I think. Yeah, I'm tripping. So we might be still at like pH 7 on both of them, despite adding, a little bit more carbonate in the salty shrimp mix. I mean, that pH is right at 7 right out of the tap, which I think most municipal water sources are supposed to be. But now I think you can kind of see how, when we do things like add an active substrate and put CO2 on top of that, how the pH can get really low really quick. I mean, low 6s. Even though that pH isn't, where maybe I'd kind of want it to be, a little bit higher, maybe like 7, 7.5 even would be kind of a nice thing to have. Even though it's not that, I'm still getting really good babies, really good numbers out of my guppies. So not really convinced that the pH has that much to do with it. I think it's just those minerals. Look, I'm not an expert breeder by any means, like not even close. So maybe that influence of pH would be meaning that I would be getting even more babies out of my fish, or the health of those offspring might be a little bit better. I have no idea. And I think that's one of those things that I'll just learn with time. But at least I have this one piece of the puzzle put together so far, and hopefully you can use that to help you too. There's other ways though to increase the hardness of your water, so where you don't have to add something to the water that you're doing water changes with. Prime example would be this guppy tank, but it's kind of a disaster, so let me clean it really quick. Well, that was slightly underwhelming. I mean, it was extremely underwhelming. Went through, clipped up some of the pothos. I'm gonna have to kind of retrain them here. I don't know, what the status of this tank is. This has been an aquarium that I've been wanting to just completely redo for, I've probably been talking about it for like a year at this point, but we did throw in some of that random tissue culture that was somehow still alive. Not sure really how those are gonna do, but the amount of detritus in this tank was insane. Like, it's gonna take me a couple more passes on this to like actually clean it up, but it looks a heck of a lot better. We got some light down into this thing. It's healthy, the fish are doing fine, but it ends up looking really bad because I'm lazy. So as long as you're not lazy, your natural aquarium can look really cool. This one still doesn't look cool, but it's just so dark in the middle. Like, we need to put a plant down there. We need to make sure the floating plants don't take over, even though they play an integral role in keeping the water quality so fine. But the other thing, and the whole reason for why I wanted to show this tank, was because of the way we set it up and the materials that we use. So the Suryu stone that we have basically all under all of this wood that you can't really see. Let me get those curtains on. That's a little bit better. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, rocks. So the Suryu stone that's in here is something that slowly over time and pretty quickly, even after you do a big water change like that, we'll test it in a second, it's gonna release GH and KH, all helping to raise the pH a little tiny bit and then also juice up the water with those minerals that the guppies obviously like. They're just doing a bunch of hybridization and random inbreeding in this tank. Not like the coolest thing ever, but it's a tank that just kind of exists in the corner of the room here. I can't tell you the exact ratio of like amount of Surrey stone to water volume that you'd want to have to get the GH or the KH that you want. But I mean, it's just, like air quotes, a reasonable amount. You don't need to fill the whole thing with rock or anything. For example, in this little, I think this is a 6-gallon tank, we just put this one kind of big rock that is kind of hard to see. Let me see if I can show that better to you. So it's a decent sized rock. It's not huge though. And that's able to raise the GH and the KH up to a level that is pretty good for breeding. And same story over here. So there's probably a little bit more rock in here, but there's twice the volume. So, you know, at least twice the volume of rock. This one actually might be a little bit harder than the other one, but I don't think it really matters so much. I'm not sure that if you were hitting like twice the GH, if you were hitting like 300, you'd be better off than at 150. Again, maybe somebody knows. I'm just doing my best over here to give you what I've learned so far during this whole process. And I mean, that seems to be kind of the magic thing for me. And look, if you don't want to use Surrey stone, if that's not like the scape that you want to set up, but you still want to have a way to get the GH up a little bit without having to add salt to water or, you know, the salty shrimp stuff, you can also just do it with crushed coral. So like Corey's famous for doing that, mixing like, I think it's 2 pounds of crushed coral for every 20 gallons of water of a tank that he's setting up. Get that down in the substrate, and then that's going to buffer the water pretty good and increase the minerals, right? But you don't have to do that. Like, I've never done that because I've never been a guy who liked having those light substrates, or at least having that look. So you can also just put an amount of crushed coral into a little bag that'll fit in your filter. Whatever size filter you're using, I think should be okay. I'm not sure how long that method's going to last for you. It seems like it shouldn't be so quick acting of a thing that would deplete itself that you'd have to be constantly refilling it like on a monthly basis or anything. Who knows? Maybe a crushed coral bag in your little canister filter or hang on bag filter would last for a year. I couldn't tell you, but that's another method that people use, and I know it works really well. But literally just changing that water hardness, getting it up there a little bit, has helped me get so many more guppy babies for the reason that I need them for, which is my feeding trials. There's more to the story as far as like how you get more guppy babies, but the water hardness one I think is one of the biggest. Like, yeah, you have to feed the females a lot if you want them to have enough energy to produce the amount of babies that you want to get, which is hopefully a lot. The temperature of the water, there is, you know, what type of food you're feeding them. All those things play a role. There's exposure to males. There was actually a study that I saw a while back that was looking at the females' exposure to multiple males. The females that had exposure to multiple male guppies, they would have their babies sooner and they would have more of them. So there's a bunch of different factors. I mean, there's not too many. It's not super complicated. Another super important thing, something that I've learned very well during this process, is that when the guppy moms have their babies, they will eat a portion of them, even if they're well fed. So one thing that you can do to help minimize that is just make sure that there's a lot of cover, a lot of hiding places for the babies to go hide. So that's why we improvised here. We wanted to try something out. This is like an old school trick where you just put in like plastic Easter basket stuff. It basically just simulates a live plant, right? Like pearlweed is another really good one that you can put in there. Any type of really dense floating plant, but you want to have something that can go down and fill in space well. So this stuff works pretty good. I think it worked better for me outside where the temperature was a little warmer. We had more babies. So I'm not sure exactly what's been going on in here. Need to pay more attention to these tanks. But there's definitely a handful of babies floating around in here, even though the temperatures are a little bit cooler. Likewise over here in this tank where we're basically just relying on all of this Rotala, just that thick, dense mat. And we have, I don't know, quite a few babies in here. Just depends on what you want to do, what you have access to, what's cheapest for you, if that's the way you want to go, or just the setup with the style of your tank. Like, are you cool with having some fake green plastic stuff in a tank? It took me a while to like be okay with that, but that tank, I don't know, it's hard for me to see from my desk, so it's easy to forget that that's what I'm doing. It works, so it's doing the job that I want, and I think that's why it's okay for me. But I get why not everybody would be into that. But that water hardness, man, that was the big thing for me that just sort of unlocked all of this. And that's what got me just to the numbers that I needed to get for what I needed them for. The whole reason why I needed the numbers of fish that I needed was because I wanted to put them into feeding trials so that we could do some comparisons of different foods with fish that were hopefully as close to the same as possible. So for me, that was guppies that all came from the same spawn after we cull out the ones that, just aren't gonna make it. No matter what, you're gonna have fish that are a little deformed and just, they might survive. They might live a full healthy life, air quotes. Like they're not gonna be as big as a normal fish. You can see this guy right here is kind of like curvy spined. That's a typical thing you might see. You're gonna have runts and just fish that aren't the highest quality, right? Especially when you're, talking about doing inbreeding. Like a lot of the guppies that we keep are just random inbred guppies. That's something that you can work around, if you want to get into the selective breeding of all of it and you want to try and breed out a certain line. We're kind of doing that with some of these, like the metal tails over here. But that's not like my main goal. My main goal was to just get as many fish as I could from all the same spawn that were close to like genetically the same. Like it's impossible to do it perfectly, and the whole reason why I wanted to do these feeding trials was to be able to prove that the food is legit and not just be like one of the other giant corporations that just make stuff up about how their food is so good. But I'm not gonna be ranting anymore about that, okay? That's not the point of this video, but I just wanted to show like why I kind of accidentally became a guppy breeder. And once that stuff is kind of like winding down, whenever that happens, I think I'll still continue to do it because it is a lot of fun. Like, I don't know, I haven't even gotten into the aspect of like the selective breeding of it too much, other than just looking for fish that are all kind of similar in size and, pairings, male and female and all that stuff. Getting rid of the obvious ones that are just super simple to know, like they're not gonna be a fish that makes it long term. But going for like a specific line and just learning all the different things, like, okay, this is like the head to body shape I'm looking for, this is the body to tail shape I'm looking for, and things like that. Like that's a whole nother aspect of it that I'm sure will come into play eventually. And that's, I don't know, that's cool to me. I mean, that is why we're basically doing all of this and all of this on the other side. So I got to get back to work on here. We got to move tanks. We got to figure out a place for this guy to live. Got to move the experiment tanks and probably pull some babies out so we can continue with that. I got to go like hit the furnace with a hammer again and like have to do something with the, I don't know, the house. What am I going to do with that? How do you get rid of a paint bubble? I already popped it, but like I got to sand it and paint it. It's raining every day. What do I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. We're going to do this. The fish room should hopefully half of it be done next week, despite all of that junk going on. I think I got this. I hope.